I decided that I was going to go with the electrical extension cord rather than the rope soaked in vinegar. Those were the two choices I had for being disciplined by my tyrannical and abusive stepfather. The routine was that I would go into my bedroom, strip down to my underwear, lie face down on the bed, and he would come in with the selected instrument of terror and proceed to discipline me. That was the last time my stepfather beat me, and I was determined that it would be the last time. I remember the first lash because I could feel the oozing of the blood as it tore my skin. I can't believe that my mother allowed this man to abuse me so abominably. But I got through it. A few days later, I came home from school and my mother was agitated and she said, "Boy, get ready for your beating. Your daddy's gonna beat your ass again." And I looked at her and retorted, "Well, first of all, he's your husband and he ain't my daddy. And the last time he put his hands on me to beat me is the last time he ever will. There you go with that mouth. That's what always gets you into trouble." And I said, "Well, I guess I can't help it. I come by naturally because everybody says I'm just like you. You better get out my face." So I did. Now, I couldn't imagine what I could possibly do that was going to change my circumstances. This man was 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. I'm just a 9-year-old kid weighing maybe 70. How can I protect myself against this brute? But when I started thinking about it, the one thing I knew I had on my side was I was quick. And if I could get away from him just before he got his hands on me, I might be able to make it through the night. So that began my bit of a plan. I knew it was going to be a risk. And it was then that I realized this was a risk that might determine whether I lived or died. 9 years old, faced with such a risk. When he opened that door, I had dressed myself in sneakers, jeans, an undershirt, and a light sweater. And all I knew was that I felt like I had been catapulted by a cannon, and I shot underneath his arm, was running through the house to get out that front door, and all I could hear him say was, "Boy, you better bring your little black ass back here." And I said, "Not tonight, Daddy." And so I could hear the flapping of my shoes on the pavement as I went on my desperate journey into the night. I had missed dinner, so I was hungry. It was starting to get a little cold, and I was tired. But I knew I had to keep on going. I had to figure out some kind of way to find a plan to get away from that. I was determined I wasn't going back to that house. Well, I go through the neighborhood. I'm jumping over fences, hiding in trees, laying down in ditches to get a little rest from time to time. And as I get hungry, I stop by a neighborhood store, and I see this bag of cookies, Oreos, my favorite. And I had been told all my life that to steal was a sin. It was wrong. And even as hungry as I was, I couldn't take those cookies. So I left the store and continued on my fretful journey. I decided that the risk I would take at this point was that rather than go back to that dismal house, I'd jump over the freeway into coming traffic. That was what I was willing to do. I knew by this time that the neighborhood had been alerted to my having run away, and all that they were going to do was just take me back there. And I wasn't going. back, ever. As I began to figure out what course of action remained available to me, all I knew was that I was really getting tireder. I was so hungry. I was starting to be cold. And for the first time in that night, I really felt frightened. So I remembered that my grandmother's next door neighbor, a childless Christian widow, Mrs. Hawthorne, had always treated me very kindly. She would give me an extra cookie or extra piece of candy. So I knew that I was one of her favorites. And I figured that maybe if I could at least get to her, she could at least put me up for the night until I could figure out what I needed to do. So I moved in the direction of that neighborhood. When I got to the block where her house was, on both sides of the streets were people in my family. And I couldn't imagine what door I could go to and what I could expect. The one thing that stood out, though, was on all those porches, the only one that had a light was Mrs. Hawthorne's. And I said, that's my guiding star. So I walked slowly to her fence, went through the gate, walked up the steps to the porch, and tentatively knocked on her door, not knowing what to expect. She opened the door, and I looked up into the face of this tall, pecan-colored woman with salt and pepper hair and the most beautiful dimples. And she looked down at me and smiled and said, "What took you so long?" I think I melted into her bosom. Deliverance. She gave me a snack and a glass of milk, and she said, "I guess I better call your grandmother." I don't know what that conversation was. All I heard her say was, "I guess I better call his mama." I don't know what that conversation was. All I heard her say was, "I guess that means I'll keep him." Now, mind you, Mrs. Hawthorne never went through the foster care system. She never formally adopted me. My mother could have come and claimed me at any time, but she didn't. And so, at 9 years old, I took a life-altering risk. And the result of that risk, I am now almost 70 years old. And it never escapes me that at 9 years old, I took the risk that has allowed me to have the wondrous, blessed, amazing life that I have today. And Mrs. Hawthorne was the catapult into this new life. And she made me discover one of my favorite quotations that says this: "Courage is the willingness to face the fear of doing the impossible." I took what seemed like an impossible risk to have the possibility of my life 70 years later. Thank you. Looking like a true